Greetings and welcome back to the show, World War II Books Where to Start. I'm your host, General Walter Bedell Smith, and I'm taking a break from being Ike's Chief of Staff to wonder about what I'm going to do post-war. I'm kind of leaning towards taking over the OSS for a while and try to make it the intelligence agency I know it can be. What you think? Cool. But in the meantime, let's do some memoirs today, and we want to try to get that frontline feeling back that we all know and love so much. So first up, we're going to do Crusade in Europe by my boss, the Ike man himself. General Dwight D. Eisenhower. I like Ike. You like Ike? I like Ike. Everybody likes Ike, and that's part of his appeal. Of course, he's the fresh-faced, happy general that never gets despondent, never gets down. Got a kind word for everybody and doesn't backbite anyone, and he's going to stay true to that tone throughout this memoir. He doesn't have a bad word to say about hardly anyone, not even a disciplinarian kind of word like, oh, I didn't really appreciate this. So pretty much, no, it's clean. He is really on the teammate side, the big team. We're all in for the big win. Let's keep morale up. Let's just keep things happy-go-lucky, and we'll get through this, and we'll get the victory. So 559 pages from 1948, and it's more or less a play-by-play of everything he did from being summoned by Marshall through North Africa, Sicily, all the way through to Berlin. And I have to say the North Africa section is the most interesting of those four. He's got some of the pre-war build-up by way of introductions, but he keeps things strictly on topic throughout. One of the things that stands out to me in the North Africa section is that when he needed extra trucks to move some troops, he needed a lot of them. His staff came up with the idea he needs 5,000 trucks. Well, where the heck can we get that many really fast? So he sends a cable to DC. They kick it around for a while. Admiral Ernest King says, yeah, I can do it with some priority shipping. Let's make it happen. And he got him in 2 to 3 weeks. You imagine any other army, any other country on earth then or even now being able to whistle up 5,000 trucks at a moment's notice, like snap your fingers and make it happen? I don't think Jeff Bezos could do that these days. I really don't. That's just an amazing amount of logistics with a minimum amount of red tape, making things happen. Pretty cool. He is a consummate diplomat, as I alluded to, when it comes to inter-allied relations, which makes him the complete professional. No griping allowed. And even if you take into account that perhaps he had his eyes on the White House even at this early point when writing this memoir, he takes no shots at anybody, really not even a sideways slap, even with a wink of the eye. Speaking of slapping, he does tippy-toe around the Patton slapping incident, wanting to protect Patton's reputation, while also acknowledging it's contrary to the code of conduct for American officers to lay hands on their men. It sounds a bit artificial, shall we say. There's nothing to say about the friendly fire incident over Sicily concerning the 82nd Airborne. Nothing to say about the strategy of entering Italy at the bottom rather than somewhere up the coast. And he thinks Mark Clark is just great. Not a word of criticism for his conduct of the campaign there, nor for his excessive personality. Doesn't make a big deal out of his crucial decision to go for the June 6th landing in Normandy, even though that's clearly the biggest decision he ever made in any of the campaigns. Is it real humility, or is it all shucks, that's just what they pay me for, folks, kind of thing? I'm not sure. That's a crucial decision. That's make or break a good chunk of the Western Allied effort right there. And he just kind of passes it off as another day in the office. Morale is a recurring theme throughout the book, and its cruciality is apparent to him. And he needs to let you know about how important it was to have, rank and file privates see, commanding generals or officer in charge, high-ranking officers up front, talking to the men, shaking hands, ask them how it's going, ask them where they're from. He says morale is really an underrated component of wartime fighting and needs constant attention to detail to maintain it. As for the bulge, he plays that line that he played in the wartime. It's an opportunity, not a disaster. He recounts the meeting with Patton saying, well, hell, why don't we have the courage to let them all go to Paris, and then we'll crush them. So he's kind of point by point with that, and gives full credit to Patton for being able to pivot his army and come to the assistance of the beleaguered troops in the bulge. Again, he's going to lay off the Monty thing. It's always a sunny side. And if there's one thing you really want is his reaction to the Monty press conference that behind the scenes everybody was up in arms about. But Mike's not going to He's not going to weigh in on that at all. You're going to be disappointed. Now, this contrasts strongly with that interview he gave later on, I think after he was out of the office of president, when he called Monty a psychopath. So there was a lot of bitterness there. There really was a lot of anger, but he kept it under wraps for a long time. Pretty interesting. Let's see. Nothing about Eddie Slovik. Nothing about desertion rates in the ETO. Market Garden wasn't even a regrettable moment. It's just one of those things. There's no mention of Patton's rescue mission. There's no real concern about the Hurricane Force campaign and all the excessive casualties it generated. Gives far too much credit to the werewolf nonsense. And this is well after the war is over that he's doing it. I think here he feels a bit embarrassed to have been taken in by this supposed threat about guerrilla action, partisan action after the war was over. So he's defending himself pretty stridently there. Let's see. What about Russia, you say? Russia. He loves Zhukov. Absolutely loves Zhukov. Gets along with him like gangbusters. Got invited to Moscow for a parade and a tour. He's invited to stand on top of the mausoleum with Stalin for a parade or some kind of sports thing. Exhibition. First foreigner to ever be given that honor. He gets a tour of the Sturmovik factory. The workers tell him how happy they are to be working 80 hours a week and boasting about their attendance records, followed by a visit to a collective farm in Leningrad. Seems like he's bending over backwards at the finale to impress us with the idea that the Soviets can continue to be our allies and we need not automatically fear communism. And then a little bit later he casually drops the mention that Zhukov vanishes from Berlin without notice or trace, and he can't get any information on what happened to him or where he went. And Berlin is split in two, of course, a year or two after this was published. Stalin gave him a picture of himself to take home as a keepsake, but who was fooling whom, if anyone? And why parade this false hope before our eyes? I'm not quite sure. And I wonder who has that picture now. I wonder if it's still around. All in all, 2-star feeling for me. Kind of a historical curiosity, not necessarily a valuable addition to the wartime literature. That's Crusade in Europe by Dwight D. Eisenhower. All right then, continuing on now, let's get some juicy gossip about the H-Man himself, Adolf Hitler, straight from the eyes and ears of Pussy Hamstengel. This thing has a seriously awkward subtitle that surely somebody could have chopped into something better or more manageable, but couldn't be bothered. So here we go. Hitler, the memoir of the Nazi insider who turned against the Fuhrer, by Ernst Hamstengel, better known as Pussy. This is from 1957, 316 pages. He comes from a really rich background, petty aristocracy, just about connected to everyone and everything worth being connected to in old Europe and beyond. He was sent to mind the company store in America during the Great War. His father's business was an art prints, I believe, and he was stuck there during the Great War, not necessarily interned, but almost a persona non grata, being German. He saved a drowning man at Harvard, went on the rowing team, and came to the attention of Teddy Roosevelt. Invited to the White House for a party, truly at ease with the rich and famous. Got sent home after the war, and he's told about a certain Herr Hitler by an American military attaché, of all people. And his first impression of good old H is that he looks like a hairdresser on his day off. So at this point, let's just take a breather. That's the clean portion of the book. The rest is salacious, gossipy inside whispers, character assassinations, and many a tart comment on the cloud of early Nazi sycophants that hung around Hitler like a cloud of flies. It's a non-stop cavalcade of dishing out dirt on these guys, told in an interview format with a ghostwriter, so it's not actually him doing the work of setting pen to paper. It's someone who came chasing him for the inside story, the real dirt beneath the dirt on the early years of Hitler and the party and the first days in power, so keep that in mind. He was giving this as a series of interviews in his apartment in Munich, I believe, after the war, when he's comfortably sitting in an armchair there, relating tales of the good old days. So it's not an actually genuine, I sat down and wrote this out longhand kind of memoir. He may not have been so upfront, blatantly honest if he had been penning this by the light of a desk lamp, but it is what it is, shall we say. So here we are. He's a highbrow consorting with gutter lowbrows, but he's taken by Hitler's well-renowned charisma and the standard talking points of Versailles bad, Germany good, communist bad, German's awesome. And I don't know if he feels that he's experiencing gutter life and exhilarated by it, or if he's really on board with the whole program. He kind of shades here and there, kind of shifty about that. The latter seems unlikely, being a pseudo-aristocrat with some worldly experience. It's far more likely he cherry-picked the good parts that appeal to his class and status and put up with the rest of it. There's so much dirt here, I can't relate it all without going on and on for maybe a full hour, and that would spoil the fun of reading it. So I'll just focus on a few things here. A. He goes all in on the syphilis-infected prostitute in Vienna thing to explain Hitler's apparent lack of interest in women. Although, it's fair to say that Pussy's really more worried about gay sex. I mean, really worried. It's repeatedly brought up throughout the book. So you have to divide your conclusions between Hitler was gay or Hitler was impotent, with a third possibility, Hitler was a sexual deviant who only got off on the rough stuff, i.e. the whip he carried was advertisement for what he really liked. And there's one moment where Pussy's at the dinner with his wife and Hitler and Gelly. And Pussy catches Gelly looking at Hitler with this look that he terms fear and loathing, because Hitler's got the whip with him. And I think that's a key moment. Is she being forced to use the whip on him? Who knows? But then again, Pussy calls her point blank an empty-headed little slut, while at the same time dismissing Hitler's family tree as nothing but inbred peasants. He refers to B. He refers to Goebbels as the dwarf, and later relates an anecdote in her house where old Joey's going up the steps and trips and falls. Magda comes to rescue, or comes to help him. She helps him back to his feet, and Joey gets his hand around her neck, forces her to her knees, and says, "You think you've rescued me this time, do you? Man, oh man, wouldn't you love to be there? That would be a classic moment. Take a picture. Oh, that would be one for the ages." C. He says he was the one behind Hitler, trying to get Hitler to meet Churchill in that hotel in Germany, and Hitler dilly-dally around it while Churchill was willing to make it happen. It was just to be an after-dinner meet and greet kind of thing in the hotel's restaurant bar. It wouldn't have been a big deal. This was in the late 20s or early 30s before Hitler came to power, of course. But in the end, Hitler chickened out, claiming it was bad optics and politics rolled together. But Pussy was kind of more like he was afraid of Churchill. D. Supposedly, Pussy tried to edit Mein Kampf into something more relatable, relevant, and readable for the masses, but Hitler was having none of it and refused to make any suggested alterations. No surprise there. Once Hitler made a decree, bam, there it was. It was unalterable. It was his favorite phrase. E. Pussy tried to civilize Hitler by suggesting Hitler a language and going on an extended trip overseas to see a bit of the world and get a broader perspective of what people and nations were like, as well as his night job, his side gig of playing piano to calm Hitler down after a speech. He got nowhere with this trying to educate the guy, but sticking with it for all those years, he's eventually given a job, appointment as foreign press chief when Hitler came to power. And there, Pussy runs with it as long as he can before being wedged out by the real serious Nazi goons and having to run for his life after that kind of ridiculous incident where they took him up in the airplane. And so they're going to dump him out over the Swiss border or something. And he got terrified. Whether it was a real assassination attempt or not, we'll never know for sure. But it's a pretty amusing moment. It's a great read. No matter how much of it you can be boiled down to core and to Hoyle actual truth, you have to dig into this buffet of madness if you've any interest in the inner workings of the Hitler court before he was anything but a street agitator. And I didn't even mention the bit about Hitler hiding out in a barrel of flour at Pussy's house upstairs in the attic when he was on the run after the failed putsch. And he's threatening suicide because the cops are onto him. But supposedly he's tamed and toned down by Pussy's wife, who uses a quote-unquote jiu-jitsu move on him to get the gun out of his hand so he doesn't shoot himself. That's hysterical. 5.5 stars. Easily the best of the Inner Circle memoirs I've read so far. Really hard to top this one. That's Hitler, the memoir of the Nazi insider who turned against the Fuhrer, by Ernst Pussy Hanfstengel. All right, Girl with a Sniper Rifle by Yulia Zhukova from 2019, 256 pages. I couldn't find an earlier publication date for this. I'm kind of thinking this was actually probably published in Soviet Union or post-Soviet Russia before it ever made it to English, but that's the earliest date I could find for it. It seems rather late in the day. Anyway. She has 8 credited kills as a sniper during the war, so not a household name, and she's really not concerned with what she was during the war. Actually, you've got to wait a while for the combat, and what there is of it's not very enlightening. She was 15 at war's start and volunteered for a collective farm, catching scarlet fever as her reward, and then typhoid fever after that. With a long convalescence, she then goes back to work at one of the relocated factories from Leningrad making torpedoes. And she claims that this factory was making the weapons that eventually sank the Wilhelm Gustloff and the General Steuben near war's end. Working conditions are harsh, and if you get hurt or even if you get mangled on the job, you've got 12 hours to shake it off, and then you better have your ass back to work or else. One boy missed a day and was sent to the gulag for a full year. Rations are tight at 800 grams of bread a day, but you get a bit more if you work some OT. Her father was in the NKVD before the war, got denounced, arrested, and tortured. She says her mother went to Moscow with that classic letter to Stalin ploy, and somehow it worked, got the father released, reinstated, and rehabilitated, but he ended up taking a different job and dying young anyway, so not a happy ending there. When you do get to the war stuff, it's what happens away from her sniper role that matters. She's almost killed by a dud shell, and she gets moved away from a couch underneath a window moments before it gets shattered by an artillery round. She's then stuck in a hospital assisting with hundreds of patients with one doctor. She's there cleaning bed sheets and binding wounds and that kind of stuff for several days. Really not loving that. She's very reactionary and defensive when it comes to the tales of Soviet depravity in East Prussia, saying it couldn't have been that bad. She was there, and points out there were some kind deeds done by the Russian troops to the locals who were living there. Although there may have been a few isolated incidents, she can't swear to it, but it wasn't as bad as it's been portrayed. Looking back, she's bitter, like there's no tomorrow, and the old days are better, and she's very angry communism is gone, and the younger generations don't respect hers and the sacrifices they made, and doesn't honor them properly or at all anymore, according to her. 2 stars overall. Not a must-have by any means. That's Girl with a Sniper Rifle. Girl with a Sniper Rifle by Yulia Zhukova. Okay then, finishing up today, our Jungle Road to Tokyo by General Robert Eichelberger from 1950. Good old Eichelberger. He's from Urbana, Ohio. Shout out to Urbana, Ohio. I haven't looked around. Maybe there's a statue to him there. I should look around and I could run up there and take some pictures. That'd be cool. Disappointing, he got one of Tojo's ceremonial swords at the end of the war. Tojo, gave it to him after the failed suicide attempt, and take this as my honorable token of surrender. And Eichelberger donated it to a museum in Urbana. It later got stolen, but was recovered, and he eventually moved it to, I think, Duke University in Carolina, where I presume it still is. That's unfortunate. I would love to have been able to go see that just a couple hours away from me. That would have been fantastic. But lost opportunity there. He retired to Carolina after the war and took his keepsakes with him. Shucks darn. Eichelberger, so famous for being Mac's subordinate, but he starts out with a little bit of background, and he was in the intervention against Soviet Russia, the Russian Civil War, back in 1918-19. He was posted to Siberia. He doesn't say a lot about it. I wish he had really been more forthcoming and open about it, because he says that he learned his distrust of the Japanese right then and there from what they were doing in Siberia, and pretty much knew right there from the get-go that they would be an expansionist, imperialist entity to deal with in the Pacific. And I wish he had gone into some detail about what they were actually doing there, but we don't get nothing. As Mac's subordinate. He is very deferential to the chain of command. Doesn't have a harsh word to say, not even against that jackass who was Sutherland, who was his chief of staff. Follows his orders, does his things, very humble. Doesn't even make a big deal about that "go capture Buna" or "don't come back alive, Bob," which is a big deal in other books about Mac and his psychopathic tendencies. That's a big moment to try to have kind of blurted this out in this weird hour of desperation. Eichelberger doesn't think twice about it, doesn't make any bones about it at all. No big deal, just not day on the job. So off to Buna he goes, and of course, it's nasty over there in New Guinea. And he's pretty honest about the conditions there and how he was in the jungle with the men and the rain and the swamp. He says there were no crocodiles, though. Anything you've heard about crocodiles, he never saw one. So he's not counting that. He's not counting that part of the story as true. The struggles to take New Guinea were really horrendous and difficult, a very thin supply chain. And that's probably the most interesting part of the memoir, is just surviving as a foothold and taking down a very difficult garrison with combined Allied troops. He's very forthcoming with full credit to the Australians for their efforts there. After that, we're going to, of course, ascend up the chain of New Guinea and eventually to the Philippines. And there's some great stuff on Biak. I'm going to have to get a book or two on Biak, because that sounds like just a really interesting fight that never gets any press these days, and if it ever did. And it's kind of a understated or forgotten moment where it's really interesting. With caves, a lot of caves, and he said that the taste of the water was so atrocious because it's blazing hot. The water table is really shallow on the island, so it's a combination of what he calls melted coral and melted Japanese from the flamethrowers, combined with a natural mineral taste, and then he adds some chlorine tablets in on top of it to make it semi-potable. And he says the taste is unlike anything else in this world you'll ever experience. And I have to believe him. I don't want to try it, but I have to believe him. So Biak is kind of one of those things that I need to investigate further. He sounds like that campaign kind of really got under his skin, kind of bothered him. Now, when we get to the Philippines, I listened to this audio, and I really think I would have benefited by having like an encyclopedia of maps in front of me for the Philippines. The geography is so extensive over such a vast territory and so many islands. He's talking about splitting divisions here and there and doing simultaneous operations and flying around everywhere to keep track of everybody, and having no fear that the Japanese could really counteract anything he was doing. He wasn't afraid to split his forces, which is usually a cardinal sin with military operations, right? Concentration of force is everything. Not in the Philippines, not with so many different islands to attack and garrisons to defeat. And the logistics here are nightmares, spanning chasms with cables to shuffle wounded men back and forth over these yawning gaps, kind of like the Death Star, chasms. They're everywhere in the Philippines, apparently, this yawning chasms, deep valleys and gorges. And, of course, you're fighting against time with the rainy season and the temperatures. And so it's just amazing, the logistics here, and all the different landings they had to make, trying to coordinate air cover with this and occasional attacks by Japanese aircraft, and even a suicide boat. He was on board, I think, a cruiser one night when the suicide boat came out of a cove and attacked a destroyer, and he was watching the action back and forth like a baseball game. So a lot of stuff going on in the Philippines, and I really wish, or really need maps in front of me to keep track of where the heck they all are. Doesn't make a big deal of Manila. Even though his forces took Manila, and I wish he had. That sounds like it needed more attention, especially with what the Japanese did to the residents there and the urban fighting that went on there. He just kind of brushes that off as just another day in the life, and maybe it was to him. But that's one aspect I wish he had done more with. Overall, I'd say 3 stars, but you can lose interest. He's going to mention lots of subordinates and guys he liked, guys he was, had under him as corps and divisional commanders that he wants to give full credit to, as well as individual soldiers in action, and like junior lieutenants who are doing really good things. He's on board with giving full credit for their initiative and action and daring and taking objectives. And sometimes though it does bog down, and it kind of, your attention will wander. But 3 stars overall. This is kind of a forgotten memoir, I think. Not much attention paid to it anymore, if any. You probably just used by historians for quotations, really, these days. But worthwhile checking out. And that will do for today's memoir sweep. Man, that was a lot, wasn't it? That was a lot. A lot to dig into there. I am, humbly, or not so humbly, Walter Bedell Smith. And if you call me Beetle, I'm going to bust you to the rank of buck private. Until next time, happy reading.